honored to have the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker today, Rabia Khedr, who is a dedicated volunteer and advocate for diverse communities, for women and individuals with disabilities as well. She is a human rights consultant with Diversity Works, founder of the Canadian Association of Muslims with Disabilities, and has been a member of both the City of Mississauga and the Region of Peel Accessibility Advisory Committees. As well, she has been on the Board of Directors for the Ontario Women's Health Network and a member of the Region of Peel Accessibility, I already mentioned that, skipping my notes there. A graduate of the University of Toronto, Mississauga, Rabia is really an agent of change in the community in the true sense of the word. Just very recently, she was appointed to be a commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. So congratulations for that really important appointment, and what a great choice they made in selecting you. I first met her actually when I was still working with the Museums of Mississauga, when we partnered with the local Canadian Federation of University Women. They had produced a book called Extraordinary Women of Peel, and it featured a number of women, both historically and contemporary women, who had really done something extraordinary in the community. And we developed interpretive panels based on each of the women. And so at our opening, which was really quite a wonderful experience, people were coming in and realizing that here was their local community, recognizing them or their grandmother. That's when we first had a chance to meet. And that meeting and that experience really stuck with me as I've followed what she's been doing with her career. So as we developed this conference program and looked at her theme, we really felt that she would bring forward some very interesting perspectives on intersectionality. You've got the title in front of you, and actually I don't. So the intersectionality of, I believe, race, culture, and disability. So I would like to welcome her up to the podium. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you to do just because I kind of want to figure out who's in the room, even though I've eavesdropped and heard things. Let's try this. And I'm not being genderist or sexist or anything like that, but just for my benefit, respond to my hello if you identify in the male category. Hello. Hello. Oh, we have a few, okay. Okay. If you identify under 30. Oh, quite a few. If you identify over 60. Oh, I thought you'd be silent, okay. All right, okay, so as a presenter, I have just demonstrated how accommodation works. And we will talk about accommodation in this little conversation that we're gonna have together in the next little while. So my topic is titled, Towards an Inclusive Society, the Intersections of Race, Culture, and Disability. And like I said, I just made you demonstrate how accommodation works, because as a presenter, I need you to accommodate me because I happen to be blind, if that wasn't a giveaway with Marie walking me up here. And I do want you to be, giving me those verbal cues. If you don't like something I'm saying, don't just, give me a dirty look, because I'll just ignore it. You don't exist if you give me dirty looks, okay? The only way you exist is if you, growl at me or, you boo me or something, okay? And in other audiences, I would say throw paper airplanes at me, whatever you feel like. Like I have to touch, feel, experience it for it to be real. But just giving me a look, nah, I'll just skip. Okay, so you're going to accommodate me. Is there anything I can do to accommodate you as a presenter? Am I parlez-vous-ing the right language? I don't do French real well, okay? But I can do a couple other languages if you wanted me to. Am I speaking clear enough, loud enough, at the right pace? The technology's good in the room? All right, all right. Okay, so we are ensuring as much access as possible in this relationship for the next, 35 minutes or so. So let me describe how I'm going to approach the time that we have together. We're going to take a journey with some context in reference to our values, explore some of our admissions, share some stories, and conclude with a commitment to create spaces and places of belonging. So what this means is we will talk about the laws of the land and history, understand our privileges, and recognize the impact of exclusion. So in case you're curious, the headgear allows me to hide an earphone, blends into the attire. My screen doesn't need to be on, but my phone is, and I'm trying to follow some notes. A little voice is buzzing in my ear while I'm talking to you, and I'm just pretending to look down at it because that's just kind of a normal, natural thing to do when you're holding a phone in your hand. Okay. So Canada has a rich history of diversity preceding Confederation, in fact. We are a nation of two founding nations, the French and the English, as we well know through our history, and a vastly rich and diverse Aboriginal or Indigenous population. And hence, how we have shaped ourselves as a nation, as a society, reflects the founding nations and does try to attempt to respect or reconcile with our Aboriginal or Indigenous populations. So we have the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was enacted in 1982, although we were a nation since 1867, we finally matured and gained our independence as a nation and articulated who we, in fact, were in 1982 very clearly, with a number of equality provisions and charter values that then expect society to conform. In recent times, given the political climate, there's been a lot of discourse around Canadian values. Well, I always go back to those values that are articulated in the Charter and hence also articulated in our human rights codes and other legislation components like the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the Federal Multiculturalism Act, etc. These are what truly, truly define what Canadian values are. So values, in fact, toward our differences are truly viewed as our strengths because they're outlined in these very important pieces of law in this nation and govern how our government interacts with its citizens and how citizens interact with each other in the public arena, in relationships where it's to do with employment, services, housing, etc. So engaging in the public arena certainly means personifying these values that we have articulated. And when I'm talking about these values, I'm talking about the prohibited grounds for discrimination under our equality provisions under the Charter, under our Human Rights Code. Under the Human Rights Code, I think we're up to about 17 prohibited grounds. And the ones most commonly familiar to us are creed, ethnic origin, language, race, age, gender identity, and sexual orientation, age, and ability. So you know, so towards an inclusive society, how do we make that happen? By honoring these values that we have articulated in these very important pieces of legislation in this country, nationally and provincially. Now, moving forward to the other half of the title, which is the intersection of race, culture, and disability, let me talk a little bit about race. So, race, no one is colorless or invisible. The color palette of flesh ranges from very light to very dark and many, many shades in between. It's not simply about black or white. And it is in fact not black or white in the sense of you looking at a white piece of paper. That's not flesh-colored white. It's important that we recognize it's important that we recognize the fact that there is privilege associated with our skin color. This is by historical social design. This does not mean that quote-unquote white people have to feel guilty about it. It just means that we have to acknowledge, we have to admit, we have to realize that there are inequities in the fact that one race has an advantage over others. Now, culture. Culture is essential to individual identity. Culture is formed in the home, in the neighborhood, in the community, in society. It's formed through institutions, and like I said, the institution of family, the institution of school, the institution of workplace, and other institutions that preserve and promote culture like the ones that many of you are affiliated with, or almost all of you are affiliated with. Culture is intertwined with our language, with our religion, with traditions. Culture is expressed through theater, music, art, all sorts of ways of artistic expression. All this cultural stuff is fluid. It's forming and reforming constantly. It does not stay the same. It is not stagnant. It's constantly evolving and finding a new place. Trying to keep everything the same is every culture's struggle. Everybody wants the way things were. How many of you want the way things were? You know, the older we get, we reminisce the past, right? We over-romanticize the past and we think things were better. As a parent, you know, I will sit here and say, well, when I was a kid, we didn't do this, right? How many of you have said that? Yeah, right? In fact, my kids will say that between themselves. I have an almost 21-year-old and a 19-year-old, and they look at and an 18-year-old boy in between, and the older two girls look at their youngest sister, who's 14, and say, oh, we weren't like that in middle school, like the way this generation is. And it's like, you guys are the same generation. You know, what do you mean this generation? So we remember the good, we skip the not so good and forget the bad, and we kind of think that, you know, the way things were is great and we have to keep things that way. Well, it's every culture's struggle. Everybody wants that. This is common to human beings across the globe. But it hinders progress. It hinders creativity. It restricts a society's imagination from reaching new powerful destinations. Exploring culture and the range of vast global cultures is an opportunity not just to discover differences, but in fact to find similarities and commonalities that then become so ever powerful in reshaping and defining this new culture that we create together. Now let me talk about disability. So we've talked about race, we've talked about culture. We're going to talk about disability and the flip side of that being accessibility. So disability is not just that. It's not just disabled. It's not just disablement. It is unique to each individual's life and their life experiences. There's a whole range of disabilities and new terminology being formed all the time. So language always evolves. But we look at disability in terms of physical disability and individuals that may use mobility devices, sensory disability, which involves, hearing loss or vision loss, and sometimes people like to lump vision loss under physical. We have learning disabilities, which can be spatial, and how people read and write is impacted, how they receive information and how they view visible impressions and expressions. You have intellectual or developmental disabilities like autism and pervasive developmental delay and cerebral palsy, etc. You have psychiatric disabilities, which we as a society are more and more talking about in terms of mental health, that we will in fact know someone in our lifetimes, if we don't today. 1 out of 5 people will experience a mental health episode in our lifetime. So barriers are obstacles that individuals with disabilities face. So an obstacle can be, for somebody with a physical disability, there's no elevator. For somebody with a sensory disability, it's only one sense that is engaged, and hence they cannot enjoy the experience. So if it's through music, somebody who's deaf may not be able to experience that music unless there is some accommodation made. Accommodations are modifications. So, we did something and here you go, and now we need to change something to make it work for you. That kind of a thing, an accommodation. My accommodation as a presenter is my cell phone plugged with earphones that are well hidden and blend into the attire. It is, in fact, the accessibility feature on my iPhone. I actually, supplicate, I pray for Steve Jobs. He did something good in his life, more than, don't get this on camera, the other IT guru. Okay? Steve did something wonderful. He designed accessibility into the product, not an afterthought. So for the most part, the iPhone is accessible. I'm a believer, okay? I believe in the eye technology. I wasn't until 2014. Until somebody blind taught me how to use it. So accommodations are hence modifications that minimize or eliminate barriers that somebody with a disability experiences. Now, accessibility, we talk about the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and we're talking accommodation. What is accessibility? So accommodation is that one-off unique thing that I have to do for you to make it accessible for you. So it's individualized. Accessibility, on the other hand, is a principle. And if it is applied at the design stage, then it in fact ensures that there are no obvious barriers from the get-go. So what do we want to do when we want to ensure accessibility? We want it applied as a principle from the get-go. We want to look at universal design from the get-go to make sure that we are not introducing unnecessary barriers. Now, again, this stuff is complicated. barriers, accommodations, accessibility, it's complicated because it's individual. It involves individuals. We have to experiment, we have to be creative, we have to be open-minded, and we constantly have to consult the people who are impacted. What might work for me as somebody who's blind may not work for somebody else who's blind. I like using my phone to read. Somebody who was taught Braille will love to read Braille in their notes when they're presenting. Now, every time somebody gives me a business card, they apologize that it's not in Braille, and I say, I don't do Braille real well. So again, it's individual. So let me talk about, okay, I'm checking my time here. We are at 3:13 and we have until 3:30, Marie? Yes, we are good. Okay, we're doing well. So now I want to move into that fun part of my conversation, okay? So now that I went up to check my clock, I gotta scroll down, so give me a minute here. All right, so I have an identity statement that I throw around often at the beginning of my presentation, and I chose not to do that today. So my identity statement that takes form, and I introduce something extra into it, with some spontaneity whenever I feel like it and I think it's important. But it goes something like this. My name is Rabia Khedr. That's the best pronunciation I can do, okay? I am a hyphen with many hijabs, okay? This is called a hijab, and I say I'm a hyphen with many hijabs because I really believe in Canada's multicultural reality. I think we're doing a beautiful experiment that is a lesson for the world. I really do believe in it. I don't think we need to debate it. It's just a fact. This is it. We are a nation of immigration that constantly comes in waves, in demand, and forms and reforms who we are as a mosaic, as a multicultural, quote unquote, nation. So I am a hyphen with many hijabs. I am a Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian woman, married to an Arab, if that means anything, a mother of 4, an activist, an advocate, a consultant, a yada, yada, yada. And I happen to be blind. I happen to have a disability. And my little joke around it is I'm legally blind. I have legal evidence that I'm blind. And I don't know who'd want to pose illegally blind, but anyway. So that's my identity statement in a nutshell of who I am. And all those aspects of who I am inform my experiences. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people say they don't see color. As a blind woman, you can understand that. I think then they don't see me. I am brown, and this is a social disadvantage at so many levels. And it works at multiple levels, by the way. It's not just about, quote unquote, black and white. It's not just about people with privilege and me being on the little darker side of flesh, not having as much privilege, but it's also the whole issue of shadeism within our communities. So within, quote unquote, the brown race, you have the issue of shadeism. The lighter you are, the prettier you are considered to be. I have 2 kids who have my older 2 girls. One is super light and the other is closer to my skin tone. Dad's a little on the light side, so one of them got the light genes and, strangely enough, got a recessive gene from both sides of the family, skipping a few generations with, gray, green, blue eyes, depending on what she wears. But one is seen as, quote unquote, prettier or more privileged than the other, within even cultural communities. And as soon as we don a scarf on our heads, we are racialized no matter what the skin tone. I have friends who are British, Irish, Scottish, Australian, who are Muslim, and if they wear a hijab, they are suddenly considered to be not, descendants of Eurocentric culture. They're considered to be the other. So, I'm also blind and I cover my head. There you go. I got the disability intersecting. I got the faith piece intersecting. People, I visibly express my faith. I have sat in situations where if I am not the speaker, people assume that I don't even speak the language. And it's my only language of power, by the way. I stink in my mother tongue. Now, all of these primary identity markers, race, gender, faith, all of these identity markers intersect and compound the barriers that I experience in society. However, other aspects of my identity, which are not obvious at a glance, i.e. my language or communication skills, my education, my career, my family or financial status. I own a house in Mississauga, help me gain some social power. That's what I'm trying to say. I am sure that things have changed today, but I do remember that trip in elementary school to the museum. So let me talk about that museum. Yep, okay. So in school, I was called all sorts of names, including racial slurs like Paki, etc. My vision loss was also misunderstood because I had some functional vision, so I could fake it in some circumstances and not so well in others. That usable vision created confusion for me and confusion for a lot of people around me, and we didn't talk about my vision. Today, we talk about disability in the classroom and in different settings, but when I was growing up in the late 70s and early 80s, we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about why Rabia had to go work somewhere else in the school and all that kind of stuff. So the disability factor created some confusion for me and everybody around me. Culturally, I did not know what a museum was. We never went to the museum as a family. It wasn't a family trip. I didn't know what to expect of a museum. All I recall of it was that it was a dark, dingy place. I hope it's not that dark and dingy anymore. I don't think it is. I think lots of people, you have, have put lots of thought. You guys have been extremely creative and innovative, and you fast forwarded it with technology and creativity to really put that rich history of art and artifact into, modern times. So I'm sure things have changed, but I haven't been there. Except to the Bradley Museum, Anne-Marie. And I didn't realize that museums would set up those kinds of displays. It was really fascinating at what the Bradley Museum did in fact do with the Extraordinary Lives book. And Anne-Marie mentioned that. I was really pleased that I was featured in that book, because that book documented women from the 1800s right to 1969, little old me being the last one, alongside Mayor Hazel being in there. So not a bad accomplishment for a blind brown woman or brown blind woman, whichever order people see me first, not a bad accomplishment to be in there with Hazel. So how do we move forward and ensure that we are in fact ensuring that people feel that they belong? So inclusion or belonging only results when a person feels respected and reflected in a space or place. It's not just how we serve our diverse customers and colleagues, how we greet and interact with them. It's also about how the environments reflect who they are, given their culture, faith, abilities, etc. I do not see, I am blind, but I can still experience. And I can experience things through feeling, hearing, and smelling. I don't always want to smell everything. I don't always want to touch everything, you know. Everybody has their preferences about things, but I can experience. And how I experience things is very different than sighted people. A few years ago, I participated in a corporate podcast, okay, for a car company, and it was around the idea of aesthetic intent, and it was how do you experience beauty being blind? And I said, it's all about how something feels to me. It's the texture of the fabric, for example. And you know, when I go shopping with friends, with my husband, with my kids, and I'll feel something and I'll say, oh my God, look at this, and they're like, ugh, it's so ugly, you know. But it feels good to me. And you know, one of the other things, I'll give you an example. My 7th anniversary, I've been married for almost 22 years now. So 7th anniversary, I gave him 7 years, and I decided that now it was time to tell him what to buy me as a gift, because otherwise I'd never get what I want, right? So I said I wanted a diamond ring. You know, it's been 7 years. Yes, you got me the engagement ring and the wedding ring. Now I wanted a white gold diamond ring. And I picked out the place, I did some homework, I started to talk to some friends, and I said, what do you look for? And they start to tell me, you know, the grade and the carat, and it has to be really clear. I said, I don't give a damn if it's clear, it has to feel good. So, you know, they said big and clear. And you know what I went and bought? I went and bought a ring that had a whole bunch of little diamonds that I could feel that made a nice little shape. I don't care if they're clear. They could have ripped me off and not sold me diamonds even, I wouldn't care. But the point being, we experience things differently through different senses that we have. No sense is heightened, by the way. I don't have super hearing, okay? I am not a bionic woman. But I use my hearing better than anybody else because I depend on it. So how do we create the spaces and places that you're connected to, that you have influence over? We apply principles of accessibility, universal design. We keep in mind people's cultural experiences. We keep in mind the whole range of diversity. We keep in mind the fact that even Barbie's trying, you know, Barbie's putting up a Barbie in hijab, a Barbie that's Asian, a Barbie that's black. That matters. That matters to the children that are growing up around us who are going to school today and going to that museum. It matters that they see themselves in that art gallery, in that museum, in that historical space. And we have the history, folks. It's a matter of digging it up, no pun intended. So you do fantastic work in defining who we are as a nation. You have very clear values before you that have been articulated through our charter, through our codes, through our accessibility laws, etc. It's really important that those be kept front and center, and that we create and we innovate and we allow our values to really create that synergy that brings diversity together, where intersections happen, and we bring forward a future where everybody feels they belong, because this is what is Canadian. Thank you. Okay, so no Q&A. Sorry. Yes? Okay. Do you guys have any questions? Marie's saying we have some time. Questions, comments? You want to throw something at me? Don't point. Don't raise your hand. Like, just yell.
We're good.
You're all good. That's the bad part of being the afternoon keynote. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay.